The Chicago Bulls officially announced new additions Jalen Smith and Chris Duarte. What were some of the things that stood out in the press release? We'll talk a little bit about that. Plus, we're going to talk about just how much the Chicago Bulls have actually gotten worse. Look at an interesting stat that lists from Andy Bailey on estimated wins and losses added, considering the new additions across the league. We're going to take a look at that as well. And then lastly, if the Bulls have truly moved into a new direction, why this season is going to be important that the young guys finally step up and take advantage of the added opportunities that they're going to have in front of them. We're going to talk about all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And I want to start off with the press releases, and it's snippets. I'm not going to get into all of it. They were long press releases for Jalen Smith and Chris Duarte, and kind of what it tells us about what they're expecting for the Chicago Bulls, because I think it's telling in those press releases the things that they kind of call out, because those are things that they want to stick in Bulls' minds, and they're hoping that they're going to be able to bring to this team. First up with Jalen Smith, he will wear number 7, so shout out to Jalen Smith there. In that press release, they pointed out the fact that he led the Pacers in rebounds 15 times last season and was third overall in the team in total rebounds. Also, he was 42% from the three-point range, and he made 61 threes last season, which was a career high for him, and that he was one of only a few he was the only Pacers player with at least 326 rebounds and over 50 made threes. So what does that tell you? That tells you that, of course, the Bulls are highlighting Jalen Smith's rebounding because they think that will be a key factor in what he can bring to this team. It's also something that we are missing with the exit of Andre Drummond. So he's coming in, he's stepping into that backup big role, and he's going to be able to rebound the ball. So that's something that they really want to make sure that all Bulls fans know, is that we brought in Jalen Smith here because of his rebounding. They also talked about his age, with him still being young enough to still develop things like that. And then highlighting the threes specifically there, in the combination of rebounds and threes, I think is important, because that is something that this team has been lacking, is three-point shooting. Now, while I hope that the Bulls in no way plan on making Jalen Smith a three-point shooter and allow his three-point shot to be complementary to something that he can do, and if he ends up getting switched out there on the perimeter, things like that, absolutely Jalen Smith can knock down threes. Nobody's going to say that he doesn't have the ability to knock down threes. They went to the threes very heavily in this press release, though, and that's just something that, like I said, I just hope when it all comes down to that we're not looking at this Bulls team just trying to make Jalen Smith a three-point shooter like they did Nikola Vucevic. To me, you'll be missing some of the things that make Jalen Smith special there. But I do like the fact that they did highlight how many times he did lead that Pistons team in rebounding, right? Because we need it. Rebounding is a key factor. It makes things easier for the Chicago Bulls, absolutely. And so in highlighting that part and that aspect of it, it just shows that, Jalen Smith's going to come in here. He's going to be expected to play the role, and it really does highlight what they're hoping to get from Jalen Smith. And he's capable of doing all those things. Jalen Smith is a nice pickup for the Chicago Bulls. I think that's pretty universally looked at, is that it's a solid pickup, right? Nothing that you look at and say this completely changes a lot for the Chicago Bulls, but it does get the Bulls a needed skill set from a player that still has a ton of upside still left that he can do as well. And at the end of the day, like, he was a former 10th overall pick as well by the Phoenix Suns. And so he was somebody who came into this league with tons of potential. And not all potential is realized, but the Bulls are hoping that some of that potential does come out for the Chicago for the Chicago Bulls when Jalen Smith is here. So let's hope when it comes down to that. 6'10", 235 pounds is what they listed him as well. So actually, he's quite a bit heavier than what he was listed on ESPN, for example, for Jalen Smith. And the Bulls are hoping that that's going to be something that helps him. And I've told you guys before, the ESPN, if you look at player stats on ESPN, they never update those after you basically come into the league, unless you become some superstar player. And even then, they don't always update that, consistently. They still have Jalen Smith listed as 6'9", 215 pounds. So the Bulls making sure that they also put in 6'10", well over that is something I think you got to look at as well there. And then next up, Chris Duarte. Now, they didn't say a whole lot about Chris Duarte. It was basically a little snippet and basically a larger post thanking DeMar DeRozan and announcing the DeMar DeRozan trade. But they did point out this. First of all, he'll wear number 27, and they did say that they are thrilled to bring Chris into the mix here with his experience, versatility, and offensive abilities. And Chris Duarte is somebody who, while I don't think, and I know a lot of Bulls fans do think that Chris Duarte can be a sleepy pickup here for a sleeper pickup, not sleepy. I don't want him to be sleepy. We want him to be a sleeper. But he could be a sleeper. Why do I keep wanting to say that? I don't know. He could be a sleeper pick here for the Chicago Bulls. I'm not somebody who's too optimistic for that. I get it. Yeah, he had a really good rookie season. He was on the all-rookie second team, right along with Josh Giddey and Ayo Dosunmu. It's funny that we have three of those guys from the all-rookie second team on that list now. But, since the 13 points per game that he scored with the Indiana Pacers his rookie year, where he shot the ball 43% from the field and 36% from three, he's never reached those numbers or efficiency again. Now, his usage has gone down. His minutes has gone down. He averaged 28 minutes and played 55 games and started 39 of those his rookie season. Since then, his second season, he played 46, started 12, and then last season played 59 games and only started 11. Now, he is somebody who has had injury concerns. We already know the history of injury concerns here for the Chicago Bulls, but his true shooting percentage has gone down since his rookie year as well. His usage rate has gone considerably down every year since then. Started off with a usage rate of 20, went down to 18, went down to 14 at that point in time. And, so it is what it is there. His assist-to-turnover ratio, things like that have improved, but that's because he's doing less of the ball handling and his usage is going down. This is a guy who, when it comes down to it, he averaged 4 points per game last year. He did that on 38% shooting and 34% shooting from three-point range. I'm not looking at Chris Duarte at being a big pickup here for the Chicago Bulls. I'm just not. Now, could he end up being a guy that maybe contributes, maybe has a couple of big games, depending on what happens? Yeah, but as long as Zach LaVine is still on this roster, I just don't see Chris Duarte getting a lot of minutes, if minutes at all. And Busilis will be prioritized before Chris Duarte for the people who think that he may not. But he should get minutes before the ball-headed hoe, Javon Carter. So that's just the thing there. Everybody should get minutes before Javon Carter. Let me be clear. Let me say that again for the people in the back. The bald-headed hoe should be at the very end of the back of the depth chart. But Chris Duarte, depending on what happens with Zach LaVine, depending on how healthy Lonzo Ball is, you already got Kobe, Josh Giddey, Ayo Dosunmu, Mattis Busilis, maybe even Dalen Terry ahead of this guy. And so because of that, I don't expect Chris Duarte to play a big role for the Chicago Bulls, but they did highlight his versatility and what he can bring as a two-way player. And maybe he catches it back as a defensively. Maybe he does that. I just don't expect him to have the type of volume or the type of opportunities ahead of him for him to really excel more than that. I think he was contract filler, and I think that with the Bulls now having a full 15-man roster and still trying to make trades, Chris Duarte being a little over $5 million contract could still very well be moved or included in one of those deals, right along with Torrey Craig. And unfortunately, I don't think anybody's going to take the ball-headed hoe. But that's my thought process there. You guys can let me know what you guys think on that one. But then the question has arisen, and this has been a really hot-button topic with Chicago Bulls fans, is how much worse have the Bulls realistically gotten, right? You know that we have Todd that calls in a lot. That he's really focused on that 2025 draft pick and keeping that pick being a very important thing here. And a lot of Bulls fans are questioning, are the Bulls going to be able to keep that pick in a draft that is going to be your next big opportunity to really get a franchise-changing talent? And it's not just about Cooper Flagg. Let me make no mistake about it. Cooper Flagg is the prize in that draft, and there are going to be a lot of teams tanking for Cooper Flagg. I don't know if the Bulls can tank with them. Of course, having more chances at the lottery, you don't necessarily have to have worse records with them. I don't think the Bulls are tanking necessarily. I just think that the Bulls are going to have a very flawed roster. But the question is, how much worse have the Bulls gotten? Andy Bailey of Bleacher Report has come up with a chart that has the estimated wins added by teams, and I think this is a really good thing to point out. And the Bulls have the worst. While they did add wins of 7.3 wins with Josh Giddey, Jalen Smith, and Mattis Busilis, they also lost 19.7 wins estimated from Andre Drummond, Alex Caruso, and DeMar DeRozan. So that means that the Bulls have improved, but they haven't necessarily, they've gotten better, gotten worse overall in the estimated wins added by those players. But that's not taking a few things into consideration, right? That doesn't take into consideration development. How much does Coby White take another step up now that he is, well, as long as Zach LaVine's on the roster, but he's still going to get a lot of more shots now. Him and Zach are going to be splitting that. Patrick Williams is going to be getting an extra opportunity. So the Bulls in this chart that Andy Bailey put out, they lost the most estimated wins. But the teams like the Thunder, Pistons, Kings, Spurs, and Magic are at the top of the list as far as adding the most estimated wins. It's not a perfect system. In no way am I saying that. But it is saying that the players that the Bulls lost impacted winning. And for a team that I think when you look at how many games the Bulls had to win in the clutch, yes, we were one of the best clutch teams in the NBA last season, and we're not going to be that this season with not having DeMar DeRozan. He was a very important player in that clutch play for the Chicago Bulls. Zach LaVine has not shown himself at this point of his career to be that level of clutch. Maybe that changes. Coby White wasn't really given as many opportunities either, but especially down the stretch of that season as his body started wearing down and things like that, he wasn't as clutch in those opportunities. So if the Bulls are in a lot of close games like they were last year, the Bulls aren't necessarily going to be given the benefit of the doubt that they can pull those games out at the same rate that they did last year, which therein lies the concern overall with how many wins that the Bulls are going to get. And the fact is, with LaVine and Nikola Vucevic, both of them still on the roster, it could keep the Bulls close enough to where they are with growth from other players that the Bulls may still can be around that 10th spot in the Eastern Conference. Now, I went over it yesterday. I'm not as high on this Bulls team winning a bunch of games like some Bulls fans are. I think all 8 teams that were the top 8 in the league last year are still going to be ahead of the Bulls. I still think that you looking at a team like maybe the Charlotte Hornets, which a couple of seasons ago had over 40 wins, if they can stay healthy with having Brandon Miller there, keeping Miles Bridges, Mark Williams being there as well, if those players take a step forward, they can leapfrog the Bulls. But the fact is that if keeping your own top 10 protected pick, and that doesn't mean tanking. There's different things. I hate when Bulls fans get here. I don't want to see this team tank. It's just about the team naturally being bad. I don't think this team is going out and saying we're trying to win, we're trying to lose basketball games. But with them not being as clutch as what they were, and how important that the Bulls' performance in the clutch was last season, that you could very well see this team take a step back. But teams like Atlanta, I don't see them as necessarily better than the Bulls. I do think that their roster makes more sense naturally now with how the changes that they've made. But again, they're still a susceptible team. We have the father of 2 of their players because I do think Ayo Dosunmu still is Trae Young's daddy. And Mattis Bucilis seems to think that he is Zachary Orisha-Sher's daddy as well. So, Father's Day come around, the Atlanta Hawks should be sending a lot of gifts to Chicago Bulls players. But outside of that, really the only team that's below the Bulls that I look at as possibly taking a step up is the Charlotte Hornets, just because if LaMelo Ball ever stays healthy, as well as Mark Williams wasn't very healthy last season, if Brandon Miller takes a big step forward, that can really push that team kind of back more to being above 30 wins. Some people have said the Toronto Raptors may have a chance with that roster. They're young. They do have some balance there now. They've broken up some monotony. But I think with the Raptors, they may be in the same place as the Bulls as far as going younger, not as young, but then trying to get these pieces to develop for themselves as well. In Detroit, I don't expect them to have only 14 wins again like they did last season. If Cade takes a step up, things like that, things can change for them also. But overall, I'm just looking at this Bulls team and saying that if the Bulls hope, and I'm not saying that we know this for sure, is keeping the 2025 pick, they haven't done enough to move in that direction to where it makes it clear. If their hope is we've gone younger, we're going to play a more exciting style. We still lack some of the same things that we lacked last season, but we are hoping to still be competitive, which has been their buzzword. I don't know if they've done enough to make it clear that they're necessarily going to do that either. Yes, there are teams that are going to be way worse than the Bulls. And I think that we make the mistake that now with the lottery odds flattening out, like if you look at it, the Hawks jumped into the number 1 overall pick. They didn't have to lose a bunch of games. I think some Bulls fans think like, oh, well, if the Bulls were really trying to be in the lottery, they would be much way worse. With the lottery odds, you don't really have to do that as much anymore. You're not seeing a bunch of the outwardly tanking as far as like, let's just pull a player here, there, or whatever. But I do think that the Bulls sit in this place where they could really go either way coming into the season. And a big part of what could push the Bulls more towards the area of getting more wins is the development of young pieces. And that's the next thing that I want to talk about here is that outside of Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic still being on this roster, which those guys do help the Bulls win more games. Make no mistake about it. Yes, even Nikola Vucevic. But you got to look at Josh Giddey, Kobe White, right? If Josh Giddey gets back to what he was as a 17, 6-6 player, basically, what does that bring for the Bulls? And theoretically, Josh Giddey does help the games of both Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic with his playmaking. Definitely took a step back last year, but even then averaging 12, 6, and 5 basically last year. But if he gets back to what he did in 2022-23, 16, basically 17 points per game, 7.9 rebounds, so almost 8 rebounds, and 6 assists per game with almost a steal per game, if he does that, that puts the Bulls theoretically on a better path. If Kobe White, who ups his percentages from what he did last year, ups his output from what he did last year to be more of a 20-point per game scorer and more consistent, that as well pushes the Bulls in an area where you're looking at them to get better, right? And then the bigger question in all of this is which one of the young guys step up? And that is the unknown thing with this for the Chicago Bulls. A lot last offseason, I talked a lot about how the Bulls were hoping that 1 to 2 players would make a step or a leap to really help raise the ceiling of that team. Now, we did get that. Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu absolutely made a step and or leap, depending on how you want to look at it, with their output, their percentages, their efficiency. They made huge steps. But unfortunately, that was met with a lot of missed time by Zach LaVine, some missed time by Vooch, some missed time by DeMar DeRozan. Those things happen, right? But now you got to look at the next crop of players with that. Ayo and Kobe aside, right? The hope that they refine and even increase from what they did. If players like Patrick Williams, Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, our rookie in Mattis Bucilis, and now I even throw Jalen Smith in there as he's still a player that's young with an added emphasis and role on themselves. If they increase their game and take steps up, and I'm not saying all of them, but if they take incremental steps in their game or a big step, and hopefully the hope of Patrick Williams, what does that do for the Bulls ceiling next year? And that's the kind of it's hard to quantify that because how do you judge it? Now, Patrick Williams, there is some doubt and some concern over how concerning is that foot injury. There's actually an article from the Heavy that actually says that foot injury may be worse than what was previously reported. We've talked about it here, how it's basically like, for lack of a better term, it's something in the bone marrow, which can be very painful, and some people don't fully heal from it. It's normal people, though, for years, right? So that's something that's a concern there as far as Patrick Williams, but how much does he, with the added opportunity? For so long, a lot of Bulls fans have said, what would Patrick Williams do if DeMar DeRozan wasn't here taking as many shots and having the gravity and the usage rate that he does? Will Patrick Williams step up in those opportunities and give the Bulls a little bit more? If that's a fair question. And so we don't necessarily know that outright, but there is that. Can Patrick Williams step up his game? Next up, Julian Phillips and Dalen Terry. They have to show more now. Like, again, I'm not saying that these guys need to be star-level players or anything like that, but Julian Phillips, who was kind of starting to show some things towards the end of that before the injury bothered him, and Dalen Terry, who always has been a player that shows flashes in some games, he'll disappear for 5 games, show another flash. If these guys can be more consistent with what they show as well, that is what they need to take advantage of. That is what I would hope and would think that the Bulls front office is also hoping that these young players are going to grab the opportunity and the bull by its horns and use the most of that to develop. And Mattis Bucilis as well. I'm not putting a whole lot on a rookie to come in and change a lot of the Bulls ceiling right off the bat, especially somebody drafted 11th, even though he had top 5 potential. Is that what does he show in this rookie year that then you can look at and say, all right, we can build off of it. And I think it's going to be rough, especially defensively for him initially. We'll see. But Bucilis has the type of mindset. He has the type of attitude. He has the kind of aura about him that he holds himself to a high standard. So seeing how these players develop and take advantage of these added opportunities, even more so, Zach LaVine is moved before the start of the season, which holding out my own doubt for. I honestly don't think Zach's going to be moved anymore. I think that the signaling from this front office kind of, to me, feels like a team that realizes we're probably going to just go ahead. We've done our moves. We're going to go forth into the regular season with this being our roster. But how much of those young guys step up? You got a handful of young guys. And again, I'm only not including Kobe and Ayo in this because I think that they made their step last year and they still can make further steps. But I'm talking about making that big step into going from a player that we look at as a young player with some promise to a player that we're starting to see the realization of that consistently. Patrick Williams, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips, Josh Giddey in a way. We kind of know what Josh Giddey is, but I'm going to put him on that list just because he's new to the Bulls roster. Matas Busilis, Jalen Smith. That's 6 young players that you have that are 25 and younger that you are hoping that come into this season with the responsibility that you're giving them and that step the hell up. And so let's hope that that's the case. I think either way, we want to see those guys develop. I do think this is going to be a Bulls team that is probably going to be in more games than what I would expect, but maybe just not have that extra to actually win the games, and that's because of the clutch factor. But we'll see. This is going to be a interesting season to watch the development and watch exactly how the Bulls compete, how even if Zach LaVine is here by the start of training camp, listen, somebody got to go with their own person. We're going to send Steve-O to the UC with their own personal cameras to do a hard knock Chicago Bulls because I would love to see what that training camp environment is like if that's the case. But you guys know we'll be covering everything here. If news breaks, we breaks. Very simple process here at Chicago Bulls Central. Make sure you guys stay locked in with us. You can follow us at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. That's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.